Good morning. I'm Ted Reichel, and this is a tutorial for a definition I wrote in Grasshopper that runs within Rhino software. The purpose of this definition is to aid in designing shapes for rotary axis work on a CNC router. I got started a little bit before I started the video. I drew this red rectangle which represents my blank. It's 5 inches across and about 6 7/8 tall, which happens to be my blank size. So I put that up there on the screen and I centered it up at the 0, 0. And the purpose of this is so we can draw our shape and know how big of a piece we're going to be turning later on. Otherwise you're just drawing out in space. Okay, coming over here, you have to design in the XZ plane. There's no getting around it. And as you can see, I'm in the XZ plane. The first block says create a vase shape. That's any round shape essentially. And the first item in one of these red squares is it needs a shape profile. So let's draw one. I'm going to use a interpolate curve. And I start at the bottom. Sometimes working from the top could cause issues. It's something I'm looking into. And I'm just creating a simple shape here. Now you notice I stayed away from the blank edge here pretty well. It's because we're going to be adding things that will start to fill in the surface. And we can move this over later on if we want to. So there's no point in forcing it right up against it now. Okay, what we want to do is enter that in. So we right click on shape profile, select set one curve, and we pick that curve. And immediately you see the revolved surface, and you see this large green surface with some green lines running up and down. And this surface represents the surface of the vase. In Rhino, it's what's known as a UV surface. I'm not going to go into explaining that. This is not a tutorial about Rhino. Okay, so we have that. A good thing to do when you're working right off the bat is to bake this shape. So I'm going to click on the bake button one time, and now my baked shape, which is a real object in Rhino, appears. I don't want to see it though, so I'm going to click on it and hide that object, but it's there. By the way, it's not necessary to do that to make everything work. It's part of the flow of how we do things to ease some other things in it. Okay, next item is input some horizontal guides. Let's do that. We need to draw a couple of lines. Generally start a little bit off the UV surface to the right and draw somewhat past. I hold down the shift key so I get horizontal lines. I'm going to make 2 of them. And I'm going to separate them out a little bit. I'll move them later. And just like with the shape profile, I right mouse click, set multiple curves, because I'm going to do both at once here. And now you should be able to see on your screen a light green line appearing on our vase, and I can change where that is by moving this line. We might want to consider that to be like our canvas that we're going to draw whatever we want to design in between these 2 lines. And we'll know where it's going to appear. UV is essentially the distance along this curve is equal to this distance top to bottom. It just puts it out into a rectangular shape so you can deal with it. Okay, so we have that done. The next item is where we start entering design elements into this. Oh, excuse me, I need to back up. One of the things under input horizontal guides is bake aids. You may not be able to see these vertical green lines, but you will in a second. So I'm going to bake the aids, and now you'll see vertical lines appear on your screen. And since I'm set to design rotations, these are my intended design rotations. I can set them to whatever I want later, but like I'm going to do a vase and I say to myself, oh, I would like this to basically be a vase with designs on 6 sides. And to ease that, I would double click here change to 6, and you can see here that it's moved my green line, so I would have to erase my gray ones and then hit bake aids, and I'd get back and it would show me how wide an area I have for a 6-sided design. We'll go back to 4, keep it simple. So we're back there. So we got that. All right. Next thing is this panel. These panels operate independently. In other words, a good thing to do before you even get started is to copy this panel when the block is set to true by Control-C, Control-V, and make a copy of it down below. These operate separately. In other words, if I put things in this panel and get them all set and it performs all the calculations, when I'm working in the next panel, this panel doesn't need to operate anymore, so it speeds things up. So keep that in mind. Okay, so what it wants is a curve. Red block, orange item, we need a curve. So let's put a curve in here somewhere. And I'm going to start with an interpolated curve. Zoom up in here. And because I baked these lines, I can snap to them. So I know I'm going to snap right there, here, and then I'm going to bring this curve up. And if I come right to here, and then I rotate 4 times, the tips of these will touch. I don't want them to touch, so I'm going to stay away from that a little bit. And now I have the curve. One thing you'll notice when you do interpolated curves, it starts out and it's crossing over my center line on me, and I really don't want that. So I'm going to move this control point over a little bit so that it tends not to do it, and this one needs to go back the opposite way. That's just a little bit of drawing stuff there. You can also do that by selecting the curve and grabbing these 3 points, use the set XYZ, and use the set X in this case, and now they'll all be perfectly lined up, and snap to it. And that way you'll alleviate quite a bit of that bowing. And we're going to pull this one in a little bit more. I can get a little finicky, so bear with me. We don't want to do that. We're moving the whole line. I want to just do this control point. There we go. Okay, so I've got my curve that I would like. Right mouse click, set one curve, click on it, and absolutely nothing happened. And that's because we have block set to true. What block means is don't allow this curve to start through onto the processing. And I do that so that we can adjust whatever we want down here without getting a recalc every time. Regeneration can get to be annoying after a while, and it helps to be able to prevent it. Most of what I have set down here, in fact all of it, is the way I would like it, so I'm going to unblock it now. And you double click because this is a Boolean, and you can see it's drawn a design element for us. As you can see, let me zoom up here, it's drawn the ends of this shape squared, cut right off, and that's because we have no taper set here. Let's set one taper, which means it's going to taper one end. In this case, it tapered the end I would like to taper, so we're all set there, but let's show what we would do if it was down here instead of up there, which happens quite often. We go to the swap ends, double click it because it's Boolean, and notice now the pointed end is on the opposite end. We'll set it back to where it was. So I have that. So now we have it set that way, and what I would like to do is I want to mirror this. So I'm going to double click on the mirror, and now I have the mirrored element there. And we can see how that looks. That's pretty good. Okay, let's take a look at a few of the other items that are on this list. Some of them are obvious, some not so obvious. Max width. I would like this to be a little wider, so I'm going to set that to 6, meaning 6 millimeters. And you notice it's gotten wider now. Base height. Let's go over to the right-hand view where we can see this best, and we'll zoom in on the perspective, or excuse me, on the top view. And let's change the base height to 1 millimeter. Notice now that it's raised the shape 1 millimeter and created an edge there. Quite often this makes for much more defined carvings, and it's a good tool to use. While we're in this view, let's change the shape height. Let's move that up to about 5. And you can see it increased the shape of the height of the shape. We're going to go back to 3, it just pleases me more. Now let's take a look. Probably at the perspective will be the best place to be able to see this. And I'm going to select the line so I can control my rotation here a bit. We're going to zoom in on the end. Let's go to the fillet radius. And we're going to set a 1 millimeter fillet radius on the end. Notice that it's now radius to the top. That can be quite handy. Often, as I've been trying this out, I'll set it to something like 0.2, which isn't much of a radius, but it produces a nicer carving. And it also smooths the machine out. Instead of going off a cliff, it goes up and around, so you can see that this is quite small now, but it's there. And by the way, all of these geometric elements taper to a point. Actually, it's not a point, it's a very small flat spot at the very end. And so your height's decreasing all the way, etc. Okay, I'm going to turn the fillet radius off because it is computational intensive. And we've got that turned off. And let's go back to our front view, and we're going to watch it here, what it's doing. You notice that the percentage is set at 50%. I'm going to bump that up to 100%. And keep an eye on the shape in this area. Notice that it's slimmed down slightly. What that means is from this point where it's starting to develop the shape, it's tapering at a constant rate out to the tip. When I change it to something like 30%, it means that coming back from the end point 30% of the distance is when the taper begins. So now the taper size is constant through this area, or the piece size is constant. This can be very handy if you want to add elements in here, which I'm going to do in just a second. I'm going to leave it at that 30% because I'm going to create an element that comes right up through here, and I want it to match perfectly in here. If I allow it at 100, it will create a step there because one will start slightly bigger than the other one was at that point. Okay, the next thing we want to take a look at is how these arrays work. Right now this says array 1 is one item. And by the way, the one item means with the mirror included. Okay, that's why I worked this. And it says a fill angle of 30 degrees goes with that. So let's change this to something like 3. So we're going to create this array of 3 items that fills 30 degrees. And this is the result. Now notice what it did. It split the 30 degrees, 15 degrees either side of center, and then created the item. That's how that works. It doesn't start here and then fill up 30 degrees going one direction or the other, because that becomes very difficult to work with in the design process. So I wrote it that way, and it seems to work out well. Now, the next array is whatever is in here to this point the number of times I would like to repeat it going around the entire shape, and it has a default fill angle of 360, so there's no point in allowing you to adjust it, or me to adjust it. So let's array this 4 times. And now we're starting to get into a little bit longer regeneration times, because it's got to morph all of these shapes onto that surface. So now we can see how that's going to work out. And of course, because we've stepped it over, we're going to get them running into one another, which tells us if we want that effect, that's fine. But if we don't want that effect, we need to adjust something. And what I'm going to adjust is my line by moving this point, and I'm going to move it over. And actually, I shouldn't have, well, we're going to leave it somewhere because we're going to move a couple of points. I didn't realize there was another one under, so we'll have to wait for the recalc here. Okay, let's grab a few more points. There's one hidden right in here on me. And we're going to move this back somewhat. Let it recalc. The shape is not going to be very pleasing. What we're shooting for is to make sure that our tips don't run into each other, and take a look at how much they're missing each other in this area. Because one of the things I can do to fix this shape, as I mentioned before, is to select the curve, and I want to do a rebuild surface on that curve. And I want to get in here and take a look at what it's doing to fix it here. And let's reduce it down a bit. Okay, it's getting much smoother here now. I'm going to select OK. And now I'll do the recalc again. And let's zoom out and see what we got. And that looks pretty darn good. One thing I'm not real happy about is where this 30% is located. So we're going to move that back. And I'm going to set that maybe at about 45%. Okay, that looks better. Let's fix that curve up and ferret it out pretty nicely there. So we've got a good looking design going here. Okay, let's input another design element. We don't just keep inputting on one because A, it would make the recalc types crazy, and B, quite often it won't accept different types of curves and different settings. In fact, it won't. So what we're going to do is add one down here, and just like I did before I started the first one, I'm going to copy this because it's set to a blank condition, and that's nice. So I'm going to copy it and move another one down here. So if we go to add another element, we'll be ready. And of course, I'm up here and I need a curve. Well, let's do something different. We've been dealing with our tapered and things like that. What I would like to create here is a closed shape, and I want to create, let's do an ellipse. And we'll do an ellipse by doing a diameter, and we can move this around. So let's start here and just come up with a size we'd like. Hold the shift key down so I get it truly vertical, and then open it up a bit, and we've drawn it. Now, to save some calc time, we got to kind of look at this, and I said that this was 90 degrees from here to here, so this is sitting at 45. If I move this right to here, it'll be in between these elements. So let's try that and see what happens. So I'll select my move, select this point and the intersection there, and we'll give this a shot. I've got no taper. I don't need to swap ends. It's a closed shape. But on the no taper, this is a closed shape, and I need to let the system know that. So it's closed now. I got my widths all set. My arrays are at 1, so it's not going to take a lot of time. Let's go ahead and set the curve and see where it goes. Unblock. And just like we thought, it's going to set it in between the two over here. Now you should be understanding why these guidelines start to get important. They allow you to place things at known distances. Though it can get a little challenging later on when you have arrays of 3 and you want something to hook up to this one, etc. It can get very challenging, but it's better than anything else I've run into. Okay, we've got that one. What do we want to do to it? Do we want to mirror it? Let's do a mirror on it just to see what happens. And double click it. And it mirrored it. Mirrors it over the center line. It mirrors everything over this. So now if I allow that and then come down here and say, oh, I want 4 items, I'm actually going to end up with 8 of them. And they're going to be on top of one another. So you need to make a decision, and the decision I always make is turn the mirror off and stick with the number of rotations. And as you can see, that produces the same effect. Let's widen this one out. It's looking a little skinny. In fact, let's make it pretty darn wide at about 8 millimeters. That fattened that right up. We're going to do the base height on this one of 1 millimeter. Now we have that. Let's zoom in. We'll see it. There's the 1 millimeter base height. And I'm really not crazy about where this is located in the vast scheme of things. So I'm going to select it, and I'm going to move it up somewhat and see how we're doing. Of course, we got to wait for the recalcs. I warned us about it earlier. This can get to taking time. Okay, we've moved it up into that area. Looks pretty good to me. We can continue on adding design elements, changing where the tapered curves are located, mirroring, rotating, doing all those sorts of things. But at this point, you're probably wondering, okay, where do we go once we get everything in here? How does this all work out? Well, what we need to do is to make it all a permanent part of Rhino so we can deal with it. First thing I'm going to do is unhide my vase shape. And we can see that all of our stuff is sitting right on the surface of it. And now we need to bake our items. Single click on these items. Do not double click or you'll get double, triple, quadruple items. There's a difference between Boolean and button. This happens to be a button. This is a Boolean. So single click on it and you see it turn light gray. Sometimes that'll take a while. And we now see our items appear with their ISO curves. And all we need to do is the same thing on this one. And we now have those baked. Okay, we're about to go to work over in Rhino itself rather than here. You can minimize, but when you minimize, it leaves up the UV screen and all your guidelines and everything. Or you can select the close button, which in fact doesn't really close Grasshopper, as you'll see in a minute. So I click on the close, and it's left me with what's over in Rhino. This is my Rhino stuff here. Alrighty. Now, of course, I forgot how much we extended any of this stuff, so we'll have to guess at it, but that's all right. This is just a demonstration. The first thing I want to do is make a copy of this horizontal line, though, because I'm going to use it. And I'm going to move it up here. You'll see what I'm doing here in a minute. I'm going to make sure when I do this that I get up past any ends. What we're going to do is we're going to show you how to hide these raw ends of this geometry. So I'm going to cut it off there. I'm going to make another copy. And this one will be used to do some trimming of the surface of the vase itself. So I'm going to just move it up some distance. All depends on what you prefer in the end. And so now we have that. And the other thing I need to do is create some kind of shape out here. So I'm going to try to find my curve here, which could be a bit of a challenge. I think I'll try hiding this. Okay, I got my curve here. You notice it doesn't really affect anything. And let's do an offset. And I'm going to do a through point so I can control it versus what I'm seeing out here. If I want to get real close, I might have to turn my snaps off so it's not jumping to everything on me. I'm going to get about that close. Okay. First thing I want to do is get rid of the upper portion of the curve I just drew. So that took care of that. And the very next thing I want to do is revolve that surface. And I want to revolve it around 0. And the full 360 degrees. So that's created that. Now I'm going to turn my other surface on. And I want to trim some away. So I'm going to select trim and that other line I drew and trim away the inside portion there. And that's left us with this surface and this surface. Let's go to perspective. We probably got to roll it around to where it makes more sense to us. And the other thing I'm going to do is go to my design layer and turn off all of that so I can see better. And next is going to be blend surface. And the surface I want to blend is this one and to this one. And my line points look good here. And I particularly like the tangency mode, but you can try some of these other ones and try adjusting the slider and see what you like. But I'm going to click OK to this, and then I'm going to join these three surfaces. For the purposes of CNC routing, that's really not necessary, because when the STL file is created and it's loaded into Aspire, it looks at it strictly from the Z direction, so you wouldn't notice anything about it. It would be fine. Okay, we're going to zoom back out, turn on our design layer, and we now have this effect where they've blended in, and we're in perspective, so we might as well take a look at what this looks like in a rendered view. And we could change the color if you're having a hard time seeing it. Let's change the color. Whoops. I want to change it over. I'm kind of partial to red myself. And get it, yeah, it's sort of a orangey red on my system. And I need to, oh, there we go. So we have all of our elements. Go back to shaded, front view. And you remember I was telling you that Rhino or Grasshopper didn't really stop. So I'm going to just click on my launch, and sure enough, here we are, right back where we left off. So essentially, that's how you use this software. There's some other features in here that I haven't touched on yet. For instance, in these panels, you'll see a preview flat true, preview morph true. Well, that's what creates, let's delete our geometry so we can see what it looks like. Okay, we're right there. Let's, we got to delete the geometry down here too. Preview flat. Turn it off by double clicking and you notice it turns green. That orange color disappeared. Why didn't it do the other one? Because the other one's in a different panel. The other one's up in this panel. So if I double click that one, away it goes. Preview morph. Same thing, but this is for the upstairs. Turn that off. And you'll see the green. I prefer to have a color when I'm working up there. It makes it easier to see, and you'll also notice that in this mode it's looking right through the vase and you can see things that are on the back side of the vase, and it can, while you're trying to design and place items, that can get to be quite confusing. So that works like that. Is there anything else in here we might want to know about? Layer names. These are for your outer surface, your area lines, your center lines, your stuff like that. They are placed on layers that are created when you run this. So you can control, like if you want to turn your center lines off, there they go. Your area lines. If we had the outer surface, we could turn it off. We don't have it. I think we erased it. Yeah, we erased it, so we can't turn it off. But it'll build those for you automatically. So you have those. Let's take a look around. That's about all the stuff that's on these. You may have noticed there's some things over here to the right. They're interesting. There's a panel called solids. This works very much like the other panels, but it works with a solid that you've created and placed down in this area. So anything that you can create over in Rhino, you might want to do a design of a flower or whatever, something a lot more organic, not so geometric. You can put it here and it will place it up there for you. We can do a fast one here, I guess. Let's give it a try. I'm going to do something fairly simple, something like a circle. Okay, there we got a circle, and I'm going to go to a perspective view so I can see a little bit better how I'm doing things. The key to this is whatever you're drawing needs to be on this plane. It can't be behind it or in front of it. If it is, it'll create it, but it's going to be either in the vase or off the vase. So I'm just going to create a copy of this. I'm going to move it out some amount, maybe 4 millimeters. Then I'm going to squish it down, and well, what should we do here with it? I guess we could loft the two together. Okay, and probably should close this up, so I'll cap the holes. Okay, let's go back to our front view, and what I'm going to do is place this element up here, and I do that by clicking on the input solids, set 1B rep. Now that's known as a boundary representation, and it's set it. Let's see if we're previewing or not. Got it set. We're missing the connection here. I'm going to do this. Normally you guys don't get to see these sort of things, but I'm going to go ahead and grab here and get over here and make the connection, and it'll appear. Okay. because we had things set over here, like obviously an array set to 8. I'm going to change that down to 4. You can see where it is. It's in kind of a dumb position. It's interfering with the circle and that. But we can move it. Move it down a bit. And because of the array 30 degrees, we need to move it a little bit to the right to get it out of the other one. By the way, these things overlapping each other is not a problem. It's just I don't care for it. So that's the way it is. Turn the mirror off. That would probably help. And there we have it. So you can create any solid you want and then project it up onto the surface. This panel I'm not going to discuss. It's something under development. It's not secret, but it creates cutout shapes up in the area up here, and I'm not sure I even want to use it, to tell you the truth. I haven't needed it. Okay, that pretty well sums up how to use this. It's not that complicated. It is quite powerful, and playing with it, you may find some interesting things about it, and interesting designs you can do. Some cautions: trying to work right on the edges of these is dangerous, on these vertical edges. If you do by accident, and it can happen, I've done it several times, you get too close and you're at an angle, and so the shape starts to go outside that, your regeneration time gets really long because it's working out in outer space somewhere. I've had it stall my system for as long as 11 minutes. I chose to wait it out because I was in the middle of developing the software, and I didn't want to lose what I'd changed. But if it happens to you, probably the best thing to do is to go ahead and reboot if you don't want to wait a long time. And like all things computer, if you're doing something you think is potentially going to cause it, save it before you try it. So that's my words of advice. Enjoy!